All right, week 5 is going to focus on lesson planning. And with lesson planning, there is a mnemonic device here, or acronym, where to, that really helps us focus our attention on what are we doing in terms of preparing for a lesson and linking it to the work we've already done in connecting standards, essential questions, and learning targets. And so what I'd like to do here is just talk through what a where to is, how it fits into. When you do the discussion post for this week, you're going to be asked to fill in some of these, one of these charts in terms of your thinking, in terms of the lesson that you're creating within your unit. So when this part is done, we'll then move on to understanding what makes a good lesson. How do you incorporate things into a lesson? And most of us being practicing teachers are working on lessons daily. Some of us may not write out a big, long lesson plan format each day. We may just use the box in the book, or we may write something more formal like the Upper Iowa plan or something like that. I want you to be familiar with and comfortable using whatever is the process you're using, but it'll need to be a little more than that standard box you fill in. So in terms of where to, this is what the chart looks like that you'll see on the discussion, and it's just going to ask you to think about what you're doing in terms of the unit you're creating in some of your lessons. And so when you think about that lesson and that unit, you want to answer these questions. So where are we going? What's expected? Where's the planning coming from after you've created your standards, essential questions, learning targets? Now you're starting to think about your assessment and your instruction. So where is that going? What's the expectation? The H, how will you hook the students? That's an anticipatory set. Oftentimes in my classroom, I might say an obscure fact. I might show a 30-second video clip. I might try to bring around something that ended the discussion the day before. How are you grabbing the attention of those students? The first letter E stands for how will you equip students for the expected performances? So thinking to that assessment piece, you know what they have to do, but how are you going to get them there? What are the things that you need to do and skills they need in their toolbox that you can give them? R, how do we rethink or revise? This really ties in nicely to those of you that are doing standards-based or standards reference grading, because it creates that thought of how do we rethink the way our students are learning, or how are students rethinking the material? Are we just giving them the same stuff, the same idea to retest and that sort of thing? How do we revise after we find out, wow, none of the students understood what we were talking about, or I didn't think that everybody would get it, but they did. Now what do I do? The second E talks about students self-evaluating and being reflective in their own learning. That can be done in a multitude of ways. That can be done through peer evaluations. That can be done through students filling out a rubric, teacher filling out a rubric, having a conversation. Students becoming reflective learners is equally as important to teachers being reflective teachers. The T stands for how will you tailor learning to the varied needs, interests, and learning styles. This isn't just special ed, tag, everybody in the middle. This isn't the idea of one size fits all, cookie cutter. Differentiation, what does that look like? Differentiation falls into a lot of different things. It could be a form of MTSS. It could be something that, in terms of, we're studying the American Civil War, and this group of students is very interested in the military side of it. This group of students is very interested in the civilian side of it, and this last group is very interested in the political side of it. So how do I make sure that everybody's getting what they need to know and understanding all those contents, those sort of things? And then varying the type of instruction you use, project-based, teacher-led, student-led, hands-on, to make sure you're meeting all the learning styles. And then the last one, letter O, how will we organize the sequence of learning? So how are we going to start to scaffold or build in these things that we're wanting to accomplish? How do we organize that? And I think that's one of the most difficult parts for most teachers is, I know what I want to teach. I know what's the most important, where I need to put the most emphasis, but I'm not sure how to organize that. And so that's what these questions are kind of meant to have you do as a student, is start to wrap your brain around individual lessons, because that's where we're headed. Lesson planning, ultimately with some assessment tied in there here for the end of week 5 and moving forward. All right, so continuing on to make sure that we're being able to fill in these thoughts and create these great lesson plans to go within our unit, we have to think about what is effective lesson planning. And as I said before, those of you who are practicing teachers, These tools that you can develop now to put into your teacher toolbox and create stronger units and lessons as you go forward will make you that much stronger of a teacher. But not only from that reward part of it, it's also going to make your students better learners and have a larger understanding and a deeper knowledge base than maybe they would if continued on in the same way that we've always taught. And I'm a big believer in reflective teaching, and I think that's something that's extremely important, is to look at something and say, why didn't that go so well? Or why did that go really well? How can I duplicate that? How can I change the things that need to be changed? And that all comes through effective lesson planning. And so the first thing that I want to talk a little bit about is effective teachers. So effective teachers do all of these different things, and I just want to highlight them real quick. While it's important to have a lot of content knowledge, it's also important to understand how do you create a learning environment that creates safety, students feel free to share their ideas, and that deeper knowledge base can develop. And so effective teachers have to do a lot of these different things, including understanding, how your students are developing. At what grade level is it okay to push this kind of content or this sort of learning style? And does it work with everyone? And where does it change? Diversity of students is important. Those of you who teach in classrooms that have a lot of diversity, and it doesn't have to be racial or ethnical diversity, it can be socioeconomic diversity, it can be thought diversity. Embrace that. Have those students share out about their experiences. That they love to do that, and other students will learn a lot from that. And the last one here in the pink that I'm a big believer in is multiple types of assessments. So in my classroom, for each standard that we assess throughout a unit, I have 3 types of assessments. I have a paper pencil type of assessment, I have a hands-on type of assessment, and I have some project-based sort of assessment. And what that does is it allows for a variety of different students to show that they truly understand those standards in a multitude of ways. And that falls here into some of these ones that are on the right-hand side, like adapting and modifying instruction. Maybe we didn't get as far as we thought we were going to get in this, this week, and we have to move on and figure out how do we go back and reteach if it's possible. It's also that ability to be flexible. A lot of times you'll hear teachers say things like, "Oh, I need to be on page 400 by Thursday," even though my students maybe didn't understand something on page 325. We don't have time to go back to that. And that boils down to that effective communication piece with our students and their parents, and the idea of using collaboration with them. Teachers, parents, students, and administration have to work effectively together to enhance the student's experience. And also, what as a teacher we can do to make that better is engage and actually be involved in our professional learning. So a lot of us have professional learning once a week, every 2 weeks. And it seems like it's the flavor of the month a lot of times where, we've got this going on, and then we've got this going on, and then we got these things going on, and they're never connected. But being able to take small snippets out of each one of those that you can bring back and apply in your classroom and push towards that district-wide initiative are really important. And so going forward, when you're planning and the strategies you want to do, you want to make sure that learning's something that's meaningful. It's not just, we're doing it because we have to do it, or we're doing it because that's the way it's always been. You want to make sure you connect your learning to related topics and possible opportunities outside of the classroom. We've talked the last couple weeks about generalization or transference of things from the idea of taking it from understanding it in the classroom to that new and novel experience, whether it's a different classroom, it's outside, it's post-secondary, those kind of things. Your instructional strategy should be things you're using that are research-based, best practices, effective models of teaching for student engagement. And finally, you want to make sure that you're fostering interest and progress in your students. You want to make sure that you're giving a variety of options for them to learn from, whether it's student-led, teacher-led, project-based, peer evaluative, flipped, however you're conducting your classroom. Make sure there's a lot of different ways for them to learn in there so they stay actively engaged. Your planning, considered to be a good plan, or we want to have highly engaged students, strong, effective planning. And good plans do a lot of things, like keep you and the students on track, help you achieve and have proof that you've met those objectives and goals, helps you stay away from the surprises that sometimes come with student lacking knowledge or students not having prior experiences. It also gives students a vision in terms of where they're coming from and where they're going. That's why I've said in the past it's important to post those learning targets, those I can statements. It also helps if there's a substitute in your room. We've had a lot of substitutes in our building this year. We've had several teachers miss quite a bit of time with different illnesses, and a lot of substitutes will come in and say, students didn't have any idea where they were at. I had no idea what we were supposed to do. The subnotes that were left were really vague, and so we got nothing accomplished. And administratively, or as a peer coach, I talk to those teachers and say, it's important that your students are accomplishing things even when you're gone. And in my district, and I'm sure in some of your districts, it's real easy to make sure there's meaningful things to do through things like Google Classroom, Google Drive, or leaving effective lesson plans for when you're gone. And the other thing that you really want to make sure you're doing to enhance student achievement is that reflective piece. Are students reflecting on what they're doing, or are they just turning it in? And the key to having good planning that's going to lead to good, strong student engagement and student growth is making sure that they're reflecting, making sure they're improving. And if you're a standards-based school, which I've seen some of you are based on your discussions, you're already building this piece into your plan, and you're probably seeing and reaping some of the benefits of what your students are able to do. On the flip side of that, if you're not a good planner, or you know people who aren't good planners in your building, you see some of these things. Frustration from both the student and the teacher. Things like, well, that was on the test. I don't understand why no one got it right. And then the students say something like, well, you didn't teach it to us. And then the teacher, oh, I did teach it to you. You guys just didn't get it. All of that's avoided by having strong lesson plans. That wandering from point to point to point. We've all sat in classes where you're not even sure how you got from point A to point Z, but you sure as heck know it wasn't in any sort of order that you can understand. Poor planning also means that there's objectives you don't meet. There's no prior knowledge connection. You're disorganized. You don't have all the materials you need. The students feel like their time is wasted. And on your behalf, it shows that you're kind of a poor professional in terms of managing what you're doing, right? When an administrator walks in, they want to see what you're doing in your classroom. And good lesson planning allows for them to ask you exactly what's going on today, where are you at, what are your essential questions, where do you think the students are going to be on this material, and good lesson planning will do that for you. So some things that are important to have in a lesson plan are things like what's the objective? The big takeaways today are the I can statement, the learning target. You want to have some kind of warm up and introduction, and usually that includes that anticipatory set, bell ringer, hook, those different terms we use, and then maybe a short reflection on what the previous day was. Ask some questions. Maybe you were talking about slavery, and you might want to say something like, yesterday we discussed why the cotton gin saved slavery. Just remind me a little bit about the importance of the cotton gin in the South and for industrial cities in the North. Those kind of things. Then you want to make sure you have a procedure that's pretty airtight. Usually, if you think about lesson planning, especially the Upper Iowa lesson plan, it talks about things like accessing prior knowledge and acquiring new knowledge. And what are the materials you need? What are you going to use that day? What's the presentation look like? Is it teacher-led? Is it student-led? Is it student inquiry-based? I mean, what are you doing there? Then how are you going to applicate it? What's the application process look like in terms of assessment? So is there a ticket out the door card? Is there a thumbs up, thumbs down? Is there some kind of formal formative assessment, or an informal formative assessment? Or is it a day where you have a summative assessment, and then that falls into the evaluation process of what does it look like when you're leaving that classroom? Is there an assignment? And if there is an assignment, is it something you're having students do to show their knowledge or to grow their knowledge? Or is it just so that you say they have something to do in your classroom leaving the day?